Well, joining me now from our Oxford studio is Catholic journalist and commentator Austen Ivereigh, and from Chicago, Barbara Blaine. She is the president of Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. Welcome to you both. Thank you very much for being with us. Barbara, let me come to you first of all. So I think I'm right in saying you too were a victim of abuse.
Yes.
And I mean, briefly, how old were you and what was done about it?
Well, the abuse happened between the ages of like 12 and 13 up until age 17. I didn't do anything at the time. I thought it was my fault, which is what my perpetrator led me to believe. And I didn't report it until I was well into adulthood. But the problem is that when I did report it, I found out that others had come forward earlier. They knew he was a perpetrator. They removed him and put him in another place where he could and did abuse more children. They failed to report him to police and convinced me that it would harm me and my family if I went to the police.
So what do you think of today's report?
Well, I think it's alarming, and I believe that what's alarming about it is it's not for it's a wake-up call for heads of state across the globe. The church officials have known this for decades, but I believe that now more than ever, that secular authorities and prosecutors and police have to investigate the church and hold those sexual predators and the enablers accountable.
Austen Ivereigh, do you think there's any chance that the Catholic Church will accede to that?
Well, what's completely missing from this report is any acknowledgement that anything has changed in the last 30 years. I mean, the report has ignored the evidence given to it by the Vatican only 2 weeks ago, that there's been a massive sea change in the way the Church deals with this, and it now has, most Western countries, including the US where Barbara is, has some of the strictest guidelines and procedures of any institution anywhere in the world, and which are often recommended by states to other institutions. I mean, the myth that the Vatican is in some way responsible for what happened 30, 40 years ago. Again, you know, where there was a failure to act back then, it was a failure of the local church to act. The Vatican, I'm sure, didn't help, but it wasn't because of the Vatican policies that happened. But the point is that the Vatican is now, since for at least the last 15 years, a major catalyst for major reform in this area, completely ignored by the report, which fails to understand also the nature of the Catholic Church. I mean, the Holy See is not, you know, the headquarters of some multinational corporation. It's recommending, for example, you know, that it changes curricula in schools and so on, but that kind of thing isn't what the Vatican does.
Okay.
You know, that's done by the local church.
All right, well, let me just... Barbara, I saw you shaking your head at part of Austen's answer there. What were you shaking your head about?
Well, I just think that that the Vatican officials and Pope Francis are very good at rhetoric and talking and studying, setting up commissions, establishing policies. But what would make a difference would be just simple action. For example, if the Pope would just follow the recommendation from the report, which is so sad that a UN body in 2014 has to be telling the Vatican to immediately remove the sexual predators from ministry. But if the Vatican were to remove the predators, open up the files, and turn over any evidence of crimes to the police, that would make children safer immediately.
Okay, let me bring Austen.
Can I respond to those two examples? First of all, the idea that there are abusive priests still in active ministry, there shouldn't be, because the bishop's guidelines in almost every country in the world makes clear that as soon as abuse comes to light, as soon as abuse comes...
loads of evidence of this.
Well, I'm sorry, there are
documentation that was given to the committee. You will see that there is evidence that sexual predators remain in ministry, and bishops who cover up for them.
Austen Ivereigh, come back. Let Austen Ivereigh speak.
If that has happened, and if it does happen, it is in violation of the bishop's own guidelines and the Vatican's own guidelines, which has long since, for at least the last 15 years, demanded mandatory reporting to the civil authorities. And as for the so-called files at the Vatican, these are copies of files which exist at the moment in dioceses. I mean, you know, there are many, many priests who have been to jail, and after they've been to jail, they are defrauded. rocked, they are laicized. I mean, the UN itself, it was revealed just after the UN hearing 2 weeks ago that Pope Benedict laicized 400 priests as a result of cases that had come to him having served their terms in prison. I mean, it's a complete myth that the church is in some way, you know, secreting or holding on to priests. And the other, I think the really bad, the really kind of damaging myth in the report is that the church in some way puts its reputation before the safety of children. Now, if that was true, and it was true probably 20, 25 years ago in common with the rest of society, it has definitely not been the case for the last 15, 20 years, when the church has been absolutely at the forefront of introducing something, the best safeguarding rules in the world.
Barbara, I know you've been champing at the bit to get in. Go on.
I just think that the bottom line is that what your other guest is saying is simply not true, and that I agree, that's the policy and that's what church officials say, but it's not the reality. And there are predators in ministry today, and what would be, if it is true that they've been removed, then why the secrecy? Why not open the files? And why is it that bishops who cover up have never been punished? For example, there's a bishop right now here in my country, in the US, who has been found guilty of endangering children, yet he's still in ministry today.
Right, I just want to come back to Austen Ivereigh, because I think do you think it's satisfactory that the response of the church today has been to criticise the report, to say it's biased, to say that it's kind of, you know, it's been conducted by people who haven't really understood, or people who've got a political agenda? When the problem has been so acute, don't you need to respond in a rather more serious way?
John, I've been involved in this story. I was very much aware of the hearings 2 weeks ago. The Vatican went there with the very sincere intention of saying, look, this is what we do, tell us how we can improve. And I was expecting this report to contain some realistic ways in which, because every institution can improve its policies. I have to say, having read the report, there is nothing about it, I'm afraid, which is creditable. It does the UN absolutely no credit. It's undermined the credibility of the Convention of the Rights of the Child. And perhaps the worst thing about it is it tries to impose on the church an ideology about gender and sexuality in relation to abortion and homosexuality, which have nothing to do with the rights of the child, which I'm afraid show that it's driven by a particular agenda and a particular ideology, and which makes it impossible for the church to accept. And so, you know, I love the UN. I would love to be able to say these are great recommendations, but I cannot see the report as creditable at all.
OK, there we have to leave it. Austen Ivereigh in Oxford, Barbara Blaine in Chicago. Both of you, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Fascinating discussion.